Russian President Vladimir Putin visited occupied parts of Ukraine, especially Kherson. Now, the Russian president visited the headquarters of the Russian troops fighting in Ukraine and attended a military meeting with the commanders to know the status of the area. Putin also visited National Guard headquarters in Luhansk in eastern Ukraine after Putin's visit was made public on Tuesday. According to Ukrainian forces, the Russians had shelled the central market area of Kherson, injuring 6 people. Now, the advisor to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has tweeted that Mr. Putin was touring the occupied and ruined territories of Ukraine to quote-unquote enjoy the crimes of his minions for the last time. This is Putin's second visit to the Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine since March. These trips to the military headquarters come as Ukraine is preparing for a new counter-offensive to reclaim the occupied territories. Let me quickly introduce my guest. I'm joined in by Fred Weir, who's a senior journalist and joins me live from Moscow. Fred, thank you for joining in. Now, such trips by the Russian leader are very rare, although he made a surprise visit to the city of Mariupol in March this year. Does it speak about Russia's military approach in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, the president doesn't have any operational reason to go down there. It was surely a morale-boosting measure. It's the same thing President Zelensky does in Ukraine. In fact, on the same day, yesterday, he was on the front line near Avdiivka. So this is sort of a PR thing for domestic purposes. But it also signals that there are rising tensions. There's expectation of a military offensive very soon. And it's hard to know because a lot of secrecy shrouding it. But the weather is really the prime indicator here. The mud season is ending. And this is a real thing militarily down through the history of this region. It's called the Rasputitsa, when mud really blocks movement, whether it's cavalry or armored vehicles moving across fields. It becomes impossible during February, March, April. But once the ground is dried and tanks and APCs and such can move across open fields, we will be expecting major action. And the thing that everybody is expecting is a Ukrainian offensive in the direction of those very places that Vladimir Putin was visiting yesterday. So I think he went down there to, reassure the troops, to have his face seen, and to boost morale. And that's pretty much all there is to it.
Right, Fred, but important to also inform our viewers in terms of how that visit played out. In fact, I'll bring a ground report of that visit of the Russian president to the eastern part of Ukraine before I take my next question from you.
We are so fortunate, almost all of us, that we have no idea what it is like to be on the front line in a war facing bullets and missiles and rockets. What is it like? Do let's hear from a soldier who was there, who was fortunate enough to have returned alive, even if he lost a leg. Life as a soldier is never easy, but those were happy days for Mykolaiv Lukash with his buddies on the front lines before the war hit. The war is still here, and so is the trauma for those who have seen the worst of it. I was posted close to Mykolaiv. I was in the Marines. Then we were posted to Mariupol to replace the 128th Infantry Brigade. The invasion we were expecting came on February the 24th. The Russians broke into Mariupol and surrounded us. their ring around us became closer and closer. Then they began to bomb us. Everything around us was destroyed. We ran out of ammunition, food, water. There was nothing left. We put up white flags over our bunkers, and still the Russians kept bombing us, hitting us with rockets. Thousands and thousands of soldiers and civilians were killed. We kept trying to fight the advancing Chechens from the Russian side. We tried to evacuate, but we had been surrounded. I was hit by a shell. I was taken prisoner and then to a Russian dugout. When I reached it, I realized I had lost a leg. I was returned to Ukraine in an exchange of prisoners. I was treated in Zaporizhia and then in Kiev, where I was given an iron leg. I will not be serving in the military for a while, but I will recover and fight again for Ukraine's victory.
Let me quickly go back to Fred. Fred, there's been a lot of change in terms of the military strategy in this war as far as Russia is concerned. We've seen General Teplinsky come back to the front line. We all know that he was withdrawn, and even Putin's visit comes amid these reports of Teplinsky making a comeback. What does it speak of Russia's military approach? This kind of turbulence that we've seen in constant military haul-up.
Yes, the war is a horror. It's a year of just the most dreadful news that, I mean, every day is a new nightmare. There's no question about that. But it's a war, and it's an ongoing war, and it's coming to some sort of a climax, very likely this spring. It's not clear what the Russian strategy is. They've certainly accumulated a lot of forces, and they have built massive fortifications all along the line of contact, but especially down there in the south, where there is the land bridge to Crimea, which they have taken and secured. It includes the city of Mariupol, which that report referenced. So it's not clear whether the Russians right now just intend to hold what they have acquired in the past year, or whether they will go on the offensive themselves.
Right.
As far as I know, as far as I can glean, and it's just mostly speculation, the Russians want to absorb the Ukrainian offensive, which is upcoming, and then decide whether to go on the offensive themselves, depending on how that turns out.
And as we speak, Fred, interestingly, there's also Bakhmut on my mind, because that is one place which has become a focal point and a symbol of the war itself, because both sides seem to continue to fight. And the question that arises is, when Bakhmut is already in ruins, why is Ukraine choosing to drain its resources over the Battle of Bakhmut?
That's a very good question. Even their Western allies have advised them to step back, move back to better, more defensible territories, which is what the Russians did twice or three times. They left the Kiev region, then they left the Kharkiv region, then they left the Kherson region with most of their forces intact and reconsolidated their lines along more defensible positions. The Ukrainians, by many accounts, should have been doing that, because there is no question, by all accounts, Bakhmut is a meat grinder. A lot of Russian casualties are happening there, but the Russians have, by most estimates, a 7-to-1 artillery advantage. They are moving forward behind a curtain of heavy artillery, and this is causing massive Ukrainian casualties as well. Yeah.
Fred, I just have a minute, and there's one question that I want to ask you quickly before I let you go. What makes you say, when you say that the war may be seeing a sort of climax this spring?
Well, because of the forces that are massed right now. Everybody has got their prime potential right there on the front line. Somebody's going to make a move, and it's bound to be decisive. I don't think that Ukraine will have, if they fail in this upcoming offensive, that they will have either the Western support and supplies or the manpower themselves to launch another such offensive. Russia, of course, has deeper resources, but they would have to have another mobilization to do the same thing themselves. So this spring is going to be very, very telling.
I think we've had a very defining conversation today. Many thanks to you, Fred Ware. As usual, it's a pleasure to have you on my show.